The other night, I was at one of those hyper-minimalist rooftop lounges in the heart of the city. You know, the kind where everyone looks like they've been curated by an AI. I struck up a conversation with a guy, let's call him Julian, who seemed like the ultimate winner of 2025. He was an executive at a green tech firm, wore a sleek titanium health tracking ring, and spent a good 10 minutes showing me his optimized life on his phone. I'm talking his surging follower count, his pristine glass-walled apartment, and a whole series of complex charts tracking his deep sleep cycles and cognitive output. He was glowing with this kind of intense, calculated satisfaction you only see in people who believe they finally, cracked the code to human existence. He told me he'd reached the pinnacle of prestige, and honestly, looking at his metrics, it was hard to argue. But then the conversation shifted. Someone mentioned the recent UN report about the global birth rate hitting a terminal floor, calling it a biological winter. And I watched Julian's face. I expected a look of concern or maybe, debate on economics. Instead, he let out the sharp, dismissive laugh. He started talking about how breeding was a low-status distraction for people who couldn't handle the complexity of the modern world. He called his child-free lifestyle the ultimate luxury belief, a way to signal that his time was far too valuable to be spent on something as primitive as raising a family. What was chilling wasn't just his words, but the sheer clinical coldness of his logic. Here was a man who had spent his entire life climbing the social and professional ladder, using every ounce of his ancestral drive for status to reach the top, only to realize, or maybe not even realize, that the ladder he was on was leaning against a hollow wall. He had successfully used his Stone Age brain to win a game that, in biological terms, made him a dead end. He was the most fit person in the room, yet by every metric of evolutionary success, he was effectively opting out of the species. And that instantaneous realization that our modern definitions of success and prestige might actually be the most sophisticated contraceptives ever devised, that really left me wondering. We've built a world that rewards us for signals but punishes us for substance. Julian wasn't a failure. He was a perfectly functioning machine running a corrupted script. So it makes you ask, if the most successful among us are the ones choosing to end their own lineages, is it a choice at all? Or have we accidentally walked into a biological trap that we're now calling progress?
That story, that's it. That cuts right to the absolute core of what we call the evolutionary mismatch.
Mismatch.
Yeah. Julian, this hyper-optimized executive, he has achieved peak performance for an individual. But the thing is, he's optimized for completely arbitrary social game, not for genetic propagation.
Right.
So what we're seeing is our deepest, most primal adaptive mechanisms. These are things that were honed over millennia in what we call the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, or the EEA.
The Stone Age.
Basically. Yeah. And those mechanisms are just misfiring, fundamentally misfiring in this hyperstimulated industrial landscape of modernity.
So it's not just a simple question of, personal priorities or economics changing. You're suggesting this whole reproductive slowdown, especially among the successful, is a kind of evolutionary software glitch.
That's precisely it. We're dealing with a really profound case of what you could call logical overflow.
Logical overflow.
Imagine a beautifully engineered survival script written for a small, resource-scarce community, say 50,000 years ago. Now, you take that exact script and you try to run it on completely incompatible industrial-age hardware. I'm talking unlimited resources, global communication, intense social density, and almost zero physical risk.
I wouldn't know what to do.
The script runs its commands: seek status, secure resources, avoid danger, but the output is catastrophic. Instead of reproduction, what you get is a collective reproductive shutdown. It's that biological winter Julian was laughing about.
Logical overflow. Can you give us a simple metaphor for that? Is it like trying to run a 4K video on an old computer from the 90s? It just seizes up, right? It dedicates all its processing power to this one impossible task and just grinds to a halt.
That's very close. Or think of a thermostat that's designed to detect fire. It senses heat and it floods the house with water to cool it down. It's doing its job perfectly.
But the stimulus is wrong.
Exactly. The brain is reacting perfectly rationally to the stimuli it's receiving. But our modern stimuli, this constant competition, the endless digital information, they overwhelm the system. All the resources get diverted to maintenance and status seeking, and there's nothing left for the basic biological background tasks.
Okay, let's really unpack this. The systemic pathology. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore the 3 core evolutionary traps that seem to be steering human success away from biological reality.
Right.
So we're going to look first at what we're calling the status trap, where this accumulation of prestige starts to function like a contraceptive. Then second, the density trap, where the modern city itself induces a kind of psychological and endocrine shutdown.
A really important one.
And finally, the digital trap, where our technology is effectively hijacking our deepest reward pathways.
It's a sobering exploration for sure. We're uncovering how the very drives and tools that once guaranteed our evolutionary triumph are now, in this really perverse twist, guiding a huge segment of the population toward a voluntary strategic dead end.
Let's start with Julian then, and the status trap. We know the ancestral blueprint, right? High social status was pretty much the best predictor of reproductive fitness.
It was everything.
If you were the wise leader or the capable warrior or the successful negotiator, that translated directly into access to more resources, better allies, and definitely more mating opportunities.
Without a doubt.
So status seeking was hardwired into us because it was a reliable proxy for evolutionary success. But today, the signals for success are completely decoupled from that biological outcome.
They are. And to understand why, we need to ground this in a couple of fundamental concepts from evolutionary theory.
Okay.
Specifically, we have to talk about costly signaling theory and the handicap principle. The main idea here is really all about credibility.
Credibility.
Yeah, if an animal or a human is going to signal a quality, let's say strength or intelligence or commitment, that signal has to be expensive to produce. It has to cost something.
Right. If I can just tell everyone I'm rich or powerful, that's just cheap talk. It doesn't mean anything. But if I demonstrate it through some action or object that requires massive resources, then it's credible.
Exactly. The signal is credible precisely because it is costly to fake. Think of the classic example, the peacock's tail.
Of course.
It's a massive, cumbersome appendage. It makes the peacock slower, it makes it harder to hide from predators, and it requires enormous energy to grow and maintain.
So why does it exist? It seems like a huge liability.
It is a liability, but that's the point. Because if a peacock can survive despite this massive handicap, it signals to potential mates with undeniable credibility that it must possess truly superior genetic quality, health, and foraging ability.
So the investment in the signal, the handicap, is something only the most fit can even afford to sustain.
Precisely. The cost of the signal is relative to the underlying quality. A weak bird couldn't afford that tail. The cost would be absolutely prohibitive.
So back in the EEA, hunting a dangerous animal like a mammoth was costly. It cost you risk and energy, but if you succeeded, it signaled undeniable strength, skill, and leadership.
Exactly. And complex cave art signaled you had resources and time available beyond just immediate survival needs. A lengthy courtship signaled long-term commitment.
In every case, the ancestral environment rewarded these costly signals that translated directly into fitness benefits for the individual and, eventually their offspring.
The problem today is that the nature of the costly signal has shifted entirely. It's been completely hijacked.
Right. Today, the costs are not measured in physical risk or calories spent on a hunt. They're measured almost exclusively in two things: cognitive capital and time.
And that's where the drive gets rerouted. The modern environment has shifted the ultimate handicap from physical prowess to cognitive and professional achievement. We've replaced the dangerous hunt with a decades-long, unforgiving marathon of prestige accumulation.
That's a good way to put it.
I mean, think about the prerequisites for being someone like Julian. You're talking elite education, multiple advanced degrees, relentless professional credentialing.
Right.
These have become the ultimate costly signals today, and they consume the most precious finite resource an individual has, their most fertile years, their peak biological window for reproduction. And this sets up the central conflict we call the Minji trade-off.
Okay, let's talk about Minji. She's the high-achieving lawyer in a city like Seoul, and she sees her 20s and 30s not as years for forming a family, but as years for grinding her way up to partner track.
She is trying to signal resource-holding potential, the ability to provide robustly for a future family.
So she's playing the long game.
She thinks she is. But to credibly send that signal, she has to invest her entire cognitive capacity and all her waking hours into accumulating professional status.
Which involves what? Crippling student debt, the pressure to network incessantly, the need for international postings.
The anxiety about taking even a single year off for anything. The time and energy required for this elite career become a massive, non-recoverable opportunity cost.
And this cost it's more insidious than just money, isn't it? It's about deferred dating, eroded social ties outside of that professional bubble, the psychological burden of this chronic, high-stakes competition.
Absolutely. The investment, which is intended to signal future fitness, is actively starving the individual of present biological fitness.
So the irony is just profound. The very process of proving her professional fitness is what consumes her biological capacity for reproduction.
That's the trap. She climbs the prestige ladder, but it's a barren ascent. All her resources get redirected into positional competition, competing for what we call positional goods, things that only matter in relation to what everyone else has.
Like the high-rise apartment or the senior associate title.
Exactly. They're only valuable because they're scarce, and that demands that she defer marriage and child-rearing past the point of maximum biological efficiency. It's a design flaw in the modern success script.
And this intense competitive environment, it also fundamentally changes the dynamics of how we signal wealth, which leads us straight to conspicuous consumption. This is the ritualized purchasing of goods that prioritize self-presentation over pure economic utility. The $80,000 car that depreciates the second you drive it off the lot.
The designer clothing, the luxury vacation photos all over Instagram, these are not just purchases, they are status broadcasts.
And for men, historically, these signals provided greater marginal fitness benefits.
Yes, because they stood to gain more through additional matings. Signaling an ability to acquire and defend resources convinces potential mates, often on a completely subconscious level, that the signaler has high long-term provisioning potential.
It's the evolutionary dance, just translated into consumer behavior. You're basically paying exorbitant prices for social credibility.
You are. But this chase, it doesn't just end with the individual. It extends to their offspring. It creates what's called the sibling competition effect.
So when Julian or Minji finally do decide to have children, they're all in on the quality over quantity model.
Completely. The resources poured into a single child are astronomical. But so is the pressure on that child to secure a spot on the exact same prestige ladder.
We often assume that in wealthy, developed nations with strong welfare states that resource competition is largely solved. But the data suggests the competition just shifts from basic survival to positional ranking.
It absolutely shifts. Look at studies conducted on families in the UK, highly developed welfare-supported society. The presence of siblings is consistently associated with observable, pretty significant reductions in resource allocation per child.
And these resources aren't just financial, are they?
Not at all. Research shows children with more siblings are, on average, shorter in stature, they have worse exam results, and they receive less parental care time.
Wait, shorter in stature? That's incredible. That suggests a subtle but measurable nutritional or energetic disadvantage, even in a wealthy context.
It does. It shows the competition for parental investment is incredibly real and intense, especially in wealthier households, where the marginal cost of raising a high-quality child is the highest.
So parents are optimizing their investment to make sure their one or two kids can compete at the very top of this cognitive capital hierarchy.
Demanding a massive resource-intensive rearing strategy. And if Minji has invested 2 decades of her peak fertility window to prove she belongs at the top, she will only accept a mate who signals the exact same level of resource-holding potential and prestige.
Her standards are totally rational, given her sacrifice, but they dramatically increase her risk of finding no suitable mate at all.
And that's the ultimate evolutionary cul-de-sac. The intense pressure for professional success, the massive parental investment needed for hyper-competitive children, and the resulting high standards for mate choice. All of these are strategically rational individual behaviors.
But they collectively increase the risk of childlessness.
Yes. The prestige ladder is designed to recruit the most ambitious and then channel their energy into a process that systematically sterilizes them.
So if that's what happens when we chase status, let's look at the environment we've built for ourselves. Because if Julian's drive is the software glitch, the modern city must be the incompatible operating system that causes the machine to crash.
That's a perfect analogy. The status trap is deeply psychological and economic, but the next trap is environmental and neurological. It's the radical shift from the small-scale, predictable social groups of the EEA to the hyper-dense, hyper-stimulatory industrial city.
Okay, to really get a handle on the profound stress of the modern metropolis, we have to look back to the infamous and frankly disturbing biological work of John B. Calhoun in the 1960s.
Right, we're talking about Universe 25.
This experiment with mice was designed to test the limits of density when resources were infinite.
Calhoun's setup at NIMH was basically a rodent garden of Eden. The mice had unlimited food, water, perfect nesting material. Every need was provided for. The only constraint was space. just the space within the enclosure.
Which is a setup that really does parallel the modern city, doesn't it? Abundance of economic opportunity and material goods, but a radical constraint on physical and, maybe more importantly, psychological space.
It is. And initially, the population boomed, as you'd expect. But once the population reached a certain density, it was around 2,200 mice, the social structures just began to collapse.
Under the weight of what? Just constant, unwanted interaction.
Exactly. This led to what Calhoun coined the behavioral sink. It's a term for the total collapse of all normal social behaviors due to excessive population density and the chronic overload of social interaction.
What did this collapse actually look like? I mean, beyond just a few squabbles.
It was a total failure of their social infrastructure. Normal mating and rearing rituals completely broke down. We saw extreme pathologies, hyperaggression, where dominant males turned into violent bullies. We saw passive males who withdrew entirely.
And it got worse, right?
Oh, much worse. Cannibalism, high rates of infanticide. The females, who were overwhelmed by the constant chaos and the need to defend their litters, often just retreated and eventually abandoned proper maternal care altogether.
So the environment wasn't starving them, the social pressure was killing them.
Precisely. And the truly chilling part, the part that really sticks with you, was the emergence of the social dropouts.
Okay.
Mice born into this environment of constant chaos, they never learned normal social conduct. They spent their days compulsively grooming a behavior called preening. They avoided all physical contact and they became utterly withdrawn.
And they were asexual.
Completely. Socially autistic, trapped in a permanent infantile state. Calhoun dubbed them the beautiful ones because they were physically perfect, unmarked by any fighting, and dedicated solely to self-maintenance.
They were biologically capable of surviving, but psychologically they had just hit a wall.
A total wall. They refused to reproduce, and even when they were moved back into a normal, healthy colony, they remained isolated until they died. The abundance-filled utopia died out due to behavioral failure, not a resource failure.
And the argument is that the city, for many modern humans, is performing a similar function.
It is.
This brings us to the modern urban mismatch. Think of Hiroshi in Tokyo, or really any dweller in a major global hub. They live in physical proximity to millions of people, experiencing a constant sensory and social barrage.
Noise pollution, artificial light 24/7, constant contact with strangers, and chronic social evaluation from work and commuting. Our Stone Age brain is simply not equipped to handle this level of sustained stimulation.
So what does that do to us on a biological level?
It creates severe endocrine dysregulation. Our system is designed for an acute threat. You get a cortisol spike to run or fight, and then it's followed by a period of rest and recovery. The modern city provides chronic, low-grade stress.
Cortisol, the stress hormone, just stays elevated.
It remains chronically elevated because the environment is constantly signaling danger.
This is the overactive smoke detector principle, isn't it? Our internal defense mechanism, which was calibrated for, say, a predator entering the cave, is now firing incessantly in response to symbolic social dangers.
Symbolic dangers like the never-ending stream of work emails, the pressure to maintain appearances on the commute, the sheer number of unknown faces you pass every single day.
And all this chronic elevation of defense hormones. It must suppress the other systems.
It does. It suppresses the necessary bonding neurochemicals, particularly oxytocin. So the individual becomes highly attuned to perceived threats and competition and structurally disconnected from the impulse toward deep social bonding and pair formation.
So the brain essentially hits the reproductive stop button. It's a profound, if maladaptive, self-regulation mechanism.
It is. If the competition seems insurmountable, if the environment is constantly signaling danger and high stress, the brain logically concludes that raising vulnerable offspring is a low-probability, high-risk venture. The city becomes, by its very design, a biological sterilizing chamber.
But we have to pause here. There's a crucial nuance that critics rightly point out when it comes to Calhoun's work. It's not as simple as big city equals behavioral sink.
No, it's not, and it's vital to make that distinction between density and crowding.
Right. Human studies on density often show really inconsistent results. People can manage physical density quite well as long as they don't feel crowded. So what's the psychological factor that mediates this?
Crowding is the subjective negative response to density. It's mediated by an individual's sense of privacy, their control over their situation, and their ability to fulfill their social role. So the breakdown isn't purely due to the number of bodies per square foot.
It's due to social interaction overload.
And what we might call exclusionary design.
So if a city apartment complex forces you to interact with neighbors constantly in a shared hallway, or if your job demands an open plan, non-private seating arrangement, That increases the subjective sense of crowding, even if the density itself is manageable.
Precisely. In fact, Calhoun's later, less famous experiments show that innovative, inclusive design like providing more rooms or specialized nooks or individual living areas could mitigate the negative social consequences
How?
by allowing individuals to control and reduce unwanted interaction. The beautiful ones weren't just decaying. You could reframe their behavior as an adaptive, though non-normative response in an environment that failed to support their specific psychological needs for withdrawal and low stimulation.
That reframes the problem entirely. It suggests the modern city, which is optimized for maximum economic efficiency and constant interaction, actually punishes neurodiversity and vulnerability.
It does.
So the failure to reproduce isn't just a biological failure. It's a failure of the environment to provide the psychological buffer that's necessary for pair bonding and raising young. The brain just chooses psychological survival by withdrawing the reproductive impulse.
And if the physical environment of the city isn't enough to induce this systemic withdrawal, well, the digital environment is there to finish the job by completely short-circuiting our internal reward systems.
Let's talk about that. The final and maybe the most insidious trap, the digital one. The evolutionarily beneficial outcomes, things like social bonding, finding food, mating, are now being systematically short-circuited by our own technology.
And the core mechanism here is the supernormal stimulus, or SNS.
Supernormal stimulus.
Right, it's essentially an evolutionary hack. It's an exaggerated version of a natural trigger that evokes an extraordinarily strong reaction, often to the detriment of adaptive, balanced behavior.
The cuckoo chick is the perfect example we used earlier. Its giant mouth triggers the nurturing instincts in the foster parent, even though it's clearly not their own offspring.
Another classic example is the oyster catcher bird. It will compulsively try to incubate an enormous fake plaster egg over its own naturally sized eggs.
Why would it do that?
Because the size and color exaggeration of the supernormal stimulus is simply more compelling than the real thing. It captures attention intensely, it increases behavioral perseverance, and it causes an overwhelming mental preoccupation. Our brains are hardwired to respond to more.
And in the modern context, that more is absolutely everywhere. From hyper-processed, high-fat, high-sugar snacks that are far richer than anything found in nature,
To the infinite customized content streams on our phones.
and when these digital supernormal stimuli hit the human brain, what happens?
They tap directly and intensely into our key motivational circuits, the nucleus accumbens, which handles reward, and the amygdala, which processes emotional relevance. The intensity of this input is something our brains cannot regulate effectively because we never evolved to handle such saturation.
So if finding a piece of perfect sweet fruit in the EEA gave us a pleasant, regulated little drip of dopamine, the modern digital version is like an IV infusion of highly refined pleasure.
It is. And the result is what we can call the digital supernormal toolkit, which provides all these shortcuts to ancestral rewards, completely bypassing the cost of achieving them in reality.
We see this first with virtual status signals. Social media platforms are engineered to deliver these little micro doses of prestige validation. Every like, every follower notification, every comment provides a continuous drip of virtual status.
It completely tricks the dominance and prestige circuits. The brain registers, aha, I am achieving social success, I am valued, I command attention, without requiring any of the substantive cost, effort, or genuine social bonding that real-world status demands.
So Julian, our hyper-executive, might get more dopamine from a trending post about his optimized morning routine than from actually engaging with his colleagues or his family.
Absolutely. And the cost is zero relative to getting a promotion or building a genuine supportive community. It's cheap status that feels real.
And then there are the false mate signals.
Ubiquitous, high definition, and infinitely available digital pornography delivers these signals, and it just saturates the visual mating system. It provides sexual gratification without any of the inherent risks, effort, emotional vulnerability, or commitment that are required for actual courtship and pair bonding.
The bar for real-world interaction goes way up, while the perceived necessity of it goes way down.
Why endure the messy, difficult, time-consuming process of courtship when you can achieve instant, risk-free gratification with a more powerful, customized SNS?
This leads us directly to the Leo phenomenon, which illustrates this illusion of evolutionary success in the virtual world.
Right. Leo, the dedicated gamer, spends his energy commanding digital legions, accumulating virtual resources, and achieving high status within an online community.
His brain registers that virtual achievement as evolutionary success. the massive, sophisticated emotional reward he receives from leveling up or winning a competition or securing a digital asset is a full system flood of dopamine.
The primitive brain doesn't have a filter for, is this real or is this virtual? It just knows. Reward achieved.
And when it's confronted with the biological imperative reproduction, which is messy, expensive, and takes 2 decades of committed resource allocation, it seems entirely redundant.
Or even inferior. Inferior compared to the optimized, low-risk, high-reward digital alternative. The digital trap has successfully weaponized our deepest cognitive shortcuts against our own biology.
Now let's tie this back to the social layer. The rise of explicit antinatalist and child-free-by-choice movements, which are often discussed with this immense ideological fervor in elite circles. You argue these are not just simple lifestyle choices.
No, they're not. They are luxury beliefs that function as the ultimate costly status signal.
Explain that. How is not having kids a status signal?
It's a classic example of a perverse inversion in signaling. A luxury belief is an idea or opinion that confers social prestige within an elite group precisely because it's counterintuitive or even costly to the holder's objective material or biological self-interest. So to publicly reject reproduction, the most fundamental biological drive, is to signal that you are so existentially secure, so far up the resource hierarchy, and so focused on post-material or complex concerns like environmentalism or self-actualization that you can afford to dismiss your own genetic line.
So you're signaling social fitness by openly flouting biological fitness. The belief itself becomes the marker of the elite.
In the EEA, saying, "I will not pursue mates or resources," would have signaled catastrophic failure or low quality. Today, saying, "My time is too valuable for the complexity of children, I choose to optimize my cognitive output instead," signals high social status, complexity, and even ethical superiority within certain professional and intellectual classes.
Creating a perverse selective pressure where the individuals most successful in the modern game are the ones least likely to transmit the successful genes or cultural traits that drove that success.
It's the ultimate design failure, using our desire for status to make ourselves obsolete.
We've now established these 3 massive systemic traps: the status games, the urban overwhelm, and the digital reward hacks that are collectively driving low fertility among the most successful. But if reproduction is the core purpose of all biological life, how does evolutionary theory explain behaviors like strategic childlessness or late fertility that seem so fundamentally maladaptive to the lineage? Why does the brain comply with a script that ends its own genetic line?
It's a great question. When an evolutionary framework encounters a behavior that seems to curtail direct fertility, it has to do one of 2 things. It either has to classify it as a recent mismatch, which is the case for many of these modern traps we've discussed, or it has to find evidence of indirect benefits to kin or existing children.
So historically, many seemingly anti-reproductive behaviors were maintained because they actually conferred fitness benefits somewhere else in the family tree. Can you give us some of that historical evolutionary context? What about something like late life low fertility? I think we need to understand the grandmother hypothesis. Why does a human female, unlike nearly every other primate, stop reproducing decades before she dies?
Menopause is a strong, a really fascinating example of trading direct reproduction for indirect kin benefits. It's an adaptation to reduce what we call intense intergenerational reproductive conflict.
Intergenerational reproductive conflict.
Right. Imagine the ancestral context, which was often patriarchal residence. That means women disperse at marriage and live with the husband's family while the males remain with their birth group.
Okay, so the older woman is living with her son, her husband, and now her son's new wife.
Exactly. And the older woman, the mother-in-law, is often in direct competition with her son's wife for resources provided by the son. Crucially, the son's wife isn't closely related to the older woman's offspring, but she is related to the son's future children.
So there's a genetic conflict of interest.
A huge one. If the older woman continues to reproduce late in life, her final children are often low probability due to her age, and they create intense resource competition with her daughter-in-law's more viable younger offspring.
It's an unwinnable, high-cost conflict for the grandmother.
It is. The older woman is destined to become the sterile helper. Therefore, menopause, or this late life cessation of fertility, can be seen as an adaptation to reduce this conflict. Instead of attempting low-probability reproduction, the older woman can funnel her resources, her energy, and her accumulated knowledge, that cognitive capital, into helping her existing, genetically related offspring, and even more powerfully, her grandchildren survive.
So this boosts her inclusive fitness far more reliably than late-life direct reproduction would. The strategic failure to compete in reproduction becomes the adaptation for the lineage.
Precisely.
That deep context really helps us understand the modern fertility collapse better. It's still about perceived resource competition, only now the competition is professional and economic, and the sacrifice is being made decades earlier.
And it brings us to the core decision-making problem that drives the Mingis and the Julians of the world: strategic irrationality. The modern mind is heavily driven by error management theory, or EMT.
Okay, what's that?
EMT suggests that our cognitive biases are exquisitely tuned to minimize the costliest errors in our immediate environment, even if that means making a larger, less immediate error in the long run.
So we are tuned to avoid immediate social and financial ruin, which is the modern equivalent of starvation or ostracism.
Exactly. Consider Minji's dilemma again. EMT predicts that she is far more likely to commit a false positive error than a false negative.
A false positive.
The cost of a false positive, that is, overestimating the financial risk of having a child now and delaying her career, is perceived as immediate, acute, and socially devastating. Losing her status, disappointing her parents, falling behind her peers.
And the cost of the false negative, underestimating long-term reproductive cost and, say, hitting infertility at 40, that's diffuse, abstract, and temporally distant.
We prioritize rational individual survival and immediate status maintenance over abstract genetic longevity. The brain is reacting perfectly to the immediate, hyper-competitive economic environment, which constantly screams at us. Competition is fierce. Your status is fragile. Do not divert resources.
So the short-term rationality leads directly to long-term genetic failure.
It's a perfect trap. And that strategic pressure on parental investment, driven by this intense quality over quantity trade-off, reinforces the high standards for mate choice we talked about in the first section.
It's a self-reinforcing loop.
It is. If competition is so high that parents must hyper-invest, then individuals must rationally maintain extremely high standards for mates to secure a co-parent who is capable of maintaining that investment. If they can't find a suitable mate, childlessness becomes the strategically rational outcome.
So if the current environment is systematically sterilizing the most driven, successful, and competitive individuals, the Mingis, the Julians, the Leos, what kind of selection event are we actually living through? This sounds like a societal self-pruning mechanism.
I think it is. It's a profound and totally novel selection event. Natural selection 2.0. Modern civilization is not a benign habitat. It's an unprecedented pressure test for human instinct.
And the selective pressure is no longer survival from predators.
No. It's the ability to resist the engineered traps, the digital, urban, and professional status games that are designed to monetize our attention and divert our cognitive resources.
Who then are the survivors of this new selection funnel? It's not necessarily the economically dominant people.
The likely candidates are those whose cognitive frameworks, or more often, whose subcultural norms, manage to insulate them from these extreme status games and environmental overloads.
What kind of groups are we talking about?
These are groups that prioritize strong, localized kin networks that consciously emphasize pair bonding and high fertility as their primary source of status, and that derive validation from parental investment rather than from purely professional prestige.
They've successfully defined their own handicap principle. Instead of signaling status by acquiring a corner office, they signal status by successfully raising 5 children in a challenging modern environment, which is its own costly, credible signal of resource stability and competence.
Yes, their reward system is calibrated differently. They find the primary dopamine hit not in the virtual world or on the hyper-competitive prestige ladder, but in the long-term tangible commitment of family life. They're running an older, less corrupted script, often because they have strong cultural buffers against the excesses of modernity.
So the way out of this trap, then, it has to begin with conscious awareness. Recognizing that our Paleolithic brain is being systematically manipulated by hyperstimuli that are designed solely to maximize profit through addiction and exploitation.
And that awareness must translate into action, starting with ethical design. We need technological and urban design practices that genuinely prioritize human well-being, that encourage balanced social interactions, and that provide pathways for healthy disengagement, rather than just maximizing engagement at any cost.
We have to use our vast technological capabilities to elevate human connection and resilience, not just to titillate the reward centers.
Or we will continue to fall victim to the very traps that we have engineered. The mechanisms that once ensured our expansion and our survival are now, in a world of engineered abundance and artificial stimulation, systematically guiding a significant portion of the successful population into a voluntary evolutionary cul-de-sac. The barren ladder we climb is one of our own design, built from the very stones of our ancestral drive for success, and unless we recognize the corrupted script, we will simply continue to optimize ourselves toward our own obsolescence.